Arise, a festival of Labour Left's ideas, and many thanks to them for helping us set this up. As the event proceeds, do put up any questions in the comments below the stream on YouTube. If we possibly can, we'll put some of your questions to our panel. Also, please follow us on Twitter and Facebook, which is @Labour Outlook. I'm Emma Dent Coad, a councillor in Kensington in the poor bit, and on some measures, it's the poorest ward in London. And I was, as many of you will know, the first Labour MP for Kensington from 2017 to 2019. I was elected just before the Grenfell Tower fire. And also Vice President of London CND, patron of Stop the War. I've been proactive in politics for over half a century, and I'm in it for the long haul, particularly in regards to justice for Grenfell. Over the last few years, I've seen firsthand and experienced the enthusiasm that we have built up for socialist policies and ideas. Our membership in Kensington went up 5 times when Jeremy became our leader. And I've seen how the political and economic establishment resists real change. I had the dubious honour of being named in the leaked report, the AHRC report, and being called a grade 1 tool for my hard work of just at the point of being elected. And I was glad to say that Kensington deserves the best. I'll be a grade 1 tool if that's what I need to be. But the need for change is here more than ever at this moment in time. All around the world, governments, including our own, are putting private profit first rather than health and people. We've seen this with the COVID disaster, with the huge corporations making billions. So the discussions on where we go next as socialists in terms of shaping our future and what lessons we learn are not only vital, they're actually critical. Our speakers tonight are Steve Howell, Deputy Director of Strategy and Communications for Jeremy in 2017 and author of The Game Changer, and he'll be speaking to us first. After that, James Schneider, who is Momentum co-founder and Jeremy's former spokesperson and head of strategic communications. And finally, former colleague, Laura Smith, who's now a council in Crewe, former MP for Crewe, who's a campaigner and writes on socialist issues in various publications. So I'm going to hand over to Steve. You have 15 minutes, Steve, and if you wish to put up questions, do please. Thank you. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Emma. Being a tool for socialism sounds pretty good to me. So we should all call ourselves that. Grade 1, definitely. I'm going to reflect a bit on the 4 years that Jeremy was leader and look at why his political opponents and our political opponents are still so obsessed with him. Only this week we had David Miliband accusing Jeremy of wrecking tactics for submitting evidence to the Ford inquiry. Well, if submitting evidence to an inquiry is wrecking, what do you call the chaos and continual attacks that Jeremy had to endure while he was leader? Never has a Labour leader had to put up with the machinery of his own party being used almost in its entirety against a leader for nearly 3 of the 4.5 years he was in that position. Now, clearly, any genuinely socialist leader must expect resistance from wealthy people, from bankers, billionaires, hostility from mainstream media, scaremongering about national security from former intelligence chiefs. Other Labour leaders have had that. I mean, even Labour leaders much more to the centre than Jeremy, like Harold Wilson, for example. So all of that goes with the territory, especially if you're a socialist like Jeremy. But what is outrageous is that people employed by the party, paid from members' money, used their positions to work against their own party and in the process aid the Tories in staying in power. Now, I worked for Jeremy in 2017 and we knew that this was happening and a lot of it was in plain view. But the report leaked in April gave us a shocking insight into the rotten culture in the party machine, as well as some specific details of a parallel election campaign. When evidence like that emerges, and when an inquiry has been set up to look into it, submitting evidence to that inquiry isn't wrecking. It's ensuring that the truth is established and proper standards of democratic accountability in the party are upheld. I think it says a lot about David Miliband that he doesn't think democracy applies when the leader is someone he opposes. So what about this parallel project, this project based at Ergen House that was revealed in April? The party's constitution is clear. It's the leader who directs election campaigns through a national campaign committee established for that purpose. The main issue at stake in the Ford inquiry is therefore governance. Officials have no right to spend money in an election campaign that hasn't been sanctioned by the National Campaign Committee, the NCC. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on the inquiry, we've got other things to talk about, but I think it's important to stress how close we came to preventing Theresa May from forming a government after the 2017 election, and how critical the allocation of resources was to success or failure in that respect. When the snap election was called, the NCC adopted a campaign to win strategy, and I was a member of the NCC, by the way, the committee appointed by Jeremy. We believe that the polls were underestimating support for an end to austerity and the radical alternative our manifesto would offer. Now, at the outset, we met fierce resistance to this idea of campaigning to win. And at first, the argument was academic because funds were limited and only 4 million, we were told, was available, a third of what had been spent in 2015. But by the middle of the campaign, and I'm talking about roughly the second week of, towards the end of the second week of May, United donated £2.25 million. Other unions had come through with money as well. And donations coming in online were way ahead of expectations, way ahead of the rate that they'd been coming in the 2015 election. So on May the 14th, the NCC insisted on expanding the target list to include 93 offensive seats. These would all at least get digital advertising from the national campaign. Some would get direct mail and many would get visits. However, it now appears that at this point, just after May the 14th or sometime around then, according to the report, about £135,000 was siphoned off, along with some staff, into a rogue operation at Ergen House to support a small group of MPs, the selection of which, if the names mentioned are correct, can't have been anything to do with their vulnerability in terms of the majorities they had, but must have had everything to do with them being favoured on the right of the party. But in a sense, that isn't the point. Actually, who they were isn't the main issue. The point is that the spending was unauthorised and therefore unconstitutional. So the question that follows from that is, would that £135,000 have made a difference? Would we have prevented May from forming a government if the whole party machine had been working wholeheartedly for the NCC's decisions? And within that discussion, there's a whole number of intangibles, but let me give you a specific illustration of how that £135,000 would almost certainly have been spent had it been available. Cast your minds back to May the 31st. It was a Wednesday. It was the last full week of the campaign. It was the day that Jeremy took a late decision to take part in a BBC debate. Behind the scenes, it was also just another day in the routine of a campaign, and it happened to be the print deadline for the final Get Out the Vote direct mailer. Now, Unite had given an extra £250,000 on top of the 2.25 million. And we had only £50,000 of that left because other money had been spent on newspaper adverts and all sorts of other things, which I won't go into. This £50,000 was enough to add 12 Tory-held seats to the mailing list for the final direct mail. And each of those constituencies would get mailings to 15,000 voters. That's what we were going to get for this £50,000. So we pressed the button to spend that £50,000. Had we had £135,000, the extra £135,000 that had been siphoned off, we understand, 2 weeks earlier, we could have added a further 35 seats to the list for that final mailer. Would it have made a difference? As it turned out, of the 12 seats we did add, we won 8, 2/3 of them. Of the 35 seats we couldn't afford to add, we won 14 of them anyway, only 2/5, so a fair bit less percentage-wise. There were a further 7 of those 35 seats, though, that we missed out on by very narrow margins, an average across those 7 seats of just 451 votes. Now, I've worked in marketing for over 20 years now, and any marketeer will tell you that a direct mail campaign normally has a success rate of 3 to 5%. And 3% of 15,000 mailers is 450. So my point is, there's a very credible basis for saying that if that £135,000, which appears to have been siphoned off, was spent in that way, it could have made a difference. Those responsible for that decision not only flouted the party's constitution, but they also, I would argue, kept the Tories in power. Now, in saying that, I don't want to detract at all from what we achieved in 2017 against the odds. It was a great campaign. It shifted opinion on an unprecedented scale. The vast majority of the money from supporters and affiliates was properly spent. We achieved our biggest vote for 20 years, and we gained enough seats, a net increase of 30, to deny the Tories a majority, and they were forced to bribe the DUP in a grubby deal in order to cling to power. It also delivered some very immediate benefits to millions of people. The Tories had to drop their plans for a dementia tax. They had to drop their plans to scrap the triple lock on pensions and to means test winter fuel allowances. And there's no question that nearly 13 million people voting for a radical manifesto shook the establishment. Whatever Jeremy's detractors inside the party say, it was not lost on the elite that we'd broken the consensus on neoliberalism and shown that a socialist alternative could win. As an illustration of that, shortly after the election, in a note to its rich clients, the US investment bank Morgan Stanley said, "For much of the past 30 years and more, a change of government ultimately had a relatively limited impact on the UK equity market, as policy settings didn't change too dramatically. However, this may not be the case if we see a Labour government take power under its current leadership, given its very different policy approach." Morgan Stanley's note went on to worry about another election coming soon and told its clients that a Corbyn-led government was now a bigger risk than Brexit. So that's what a big US investment bank was saying. They saw the threat of a real socialist alternative. And how did they respond to that threat? I think it was basically, we can put it in 3 categories: the carrot, the stick, and the split. And I just want to go through those 3. The question for the establishment was it possible for them to take the wind out of our sails after 2017 by making concession on policy and buying off a proportion of Labour's support? The Daily Telegraph was alarmed about this idea. They called it the Corbyn light approach and were worried it would just encourage people to actually want the real thing. But the government and the Tories generally, in effect, adopted this approach. They came to see that they needed to at least appear to end austerity. So Theresa May announced in October 28 the end of austerity, which we know was a bit of a farce, but it says something about where they were politically. And of course, when Boris Johnson came along, he made promises about spending on the NHS, about building new hospitals, restoring peace cuts, investing in infrastructure to level up left behind regions, all of which were designed to try and draw away from us support. But in a sense, a sort of backhanded compliment that we had forced them into that situation. one of my favourite headlines from this period is actually from April 2019. I don't know if you can see that. Water bills cut as Corbyn threat looms. And the intro to this piece says, under threat of nationalisation from a Corbyn-led government, Britain's 3 listed water companies have agreed to the largest cuts in customer bills since privatisation by Margaret Thatcher 30 years ago. So in a very real sense, simply the threat of a Corbyn government literally put money in people's pockets. So that was one tactic, trying to buy off support. The second was the stick. And we saw after 2017 a real escalation of the attacks, particularly on Jeremy and on Labour generally. We'd seen it in the latter stages of the 2017 campaign when they became particularly vicious. But there was a renewed onslaught that I think is particularly sort of emerged in the early part of 2018 and then was sustained through that right up to the election. And that involved, as you know, we're all too familiar with, trawling through Jeremy's 40+ years of campaigning to see if they could find anything they could use. If he'd been in the vicinity of anyone controversial, such as a leader of Hamas, it didn't matter that Jimmy Carter had also met Hamas, they could make a big thing out of it. And then on anti-Semitism, people weren't told that the Labour leader has literally no power when it comes to disciplinary matters, and that Ian McNicol, who was in charge of dealing with anti-Semitism cases until April 2018, bears the responsibility for what happened in that period. So never mind the facts or any sense of balance, Jeremy was vilified in a way that was often hard for us to answer and was bound to sap some support. And then the third tactic was this split point. And I think divide and rule actually was in some ways the most difficult for us and would, in my view, prove to be the most damaging. The tactic was to create a split in the Corbyn camp around the question of Brexit. Our enemies were sharp enough to see that this was potentially our Achilles heel, that most Labour members, including many Corbyn supporters, were Remainers and had only very reluctantly accepted the result of the 2016 referendum. And that as Brexit negotiations became mired in difficulty, that they could be drawn into a campaign for a so-called people's vote. Ironically, at this point, it was the Blairites, who usually dismissed the politics of protest, who took to the streets. And by the spring of 2019, the pressure to support a second referendum was such that a majority of the shadow cabinet came round to the idea, despite strong opposition from those, especially in northern seats, who wanted to stick to the 2017 policy. And of course, the Tories instantly saw their chance and called the bluff of the opposition parties on a general election, knowing Labour would be vulnerable in Leave areas. And then Nigel Farage did his bit by transforming the Brexit Party from a threat to the Tories into their auxiliary force, standing only in Labour seats and serving as a repository for the votes of disgruntled Labour supporters who couldn't bring themselves to vote Tory. Now, personally, I'd wanted to stick to the 2017 manifesto, but I accept this was a very difficult situation and that leading people in the Corbyn camp changed their mind about a second referendum in good faith, believing it was the best way both to resolve the Brexit deadlock and to win the election. Which takes me to the election. I haven't got time now to talk in any detail about the 2019 campaign, but I think the result itself tells you nearly everything you need to know about why we lost. Altogether, we lost 60 seats, 6 of them in Scotland, 54 in England and Wales, 48 in England, 6 in Wales. And of the 54 in England and Wales, 52 were in Leave voting areas. So those who want to put all the blame on Jeremy need to explain, I think, why the Labour vote largely held up in Remain areas, but fell often dramatically in Leave areas. I mean, if you take Wales as an example, in the marginal seat of Cardiff North, our vote share was almost exactly the same as in 2017, whereas in the 6 Leave voting seats we lost, our vote dropped by an average of 10.4 percentage points. In other words, 1 in 5 of our voters defected. And I think that pattern was very clear in England too. And the irony is that the principal architect of this calamity was actually, in the end, its main beneficiary, and I'm referring here to Keir Starmer. He, more than anyone, had steered us towards supporting a second referendum and given the voters the impression we were a Remain party. Yet, from the wreckage of that result, he was elected leader. Policy-wise, he stood on a platform of continuity, the 10 pledges. But it was clear to anyone looking closely that Blairite muscle and money was very much behind him. And after Keir was elected, it didn't take long for their influence to surface. In picking a shadow cabinet, for example, he installed right-wingers into a number of key posts, particularly in the pivotal Treasury team, which I think says a lot. The trio there of Bridget Phillipson, Pat McFadden and Wes Streeting are all implacably and ideologically opposed to the core economic policy of the Corbyn period. Now, in the past, the Labour right has accused the left of being ideological and described themselves as pragmatist. Harold Wilson always talked about himself in those terms. They'd argue that they didn't have anything against socialism, but the public would never vote for it. What's now explicit is that the right is ideologically committed to defending private ownership, even to the extent of calling public ownership confiscation, which was the word that Pat McFadden used after the last election. So their entrenchment in the Treasury team, I think, is a real cause for concern. They now control the potential purse strings of a future Labour government. But not content with that, they want to rid the party of socialists altogether. Several of their leading lights have called for the whip to be taken away from Jeremy. In July, in the Times, Philip Collins, the former chief speechwriter to Tony Blair and now columnist, called for Jeremy to be expelled altogether from the Labour Party as part of a move to split the party. He said the party contains two ideological groups who ought not to be glued together, the Social Democrats and the Socialists. A split would be traumatic, but in the end, cathartic. So anyone who thinks this is just about Corbyn, I think there's your answer. It's much more fundamental than that. It's about whether socialism has a place at all in the Labour Party, in what we often think of as a socialist party. So I just want to finish by talking a bit about socialism. It's time we talked about socialism, I think, a lot more. We often use the word, but we don't necessarily all have the same view of what we mean by it. Traditionally, the Bennite and the Marxist left have talked about socialism in terms of ownership of the means of production, putting the real wealth creators in control and in charge of the productive forces, a clause 4 approach, if you like. There are others who define themselves as socialists on the basis of wanting to redistribute wealth through the tax system and to expand public services. And then there are those who, in talking about socialism, place the emphasis on outcomes. For example, Cynthia Nixon of Sex and the City fame said when she stood for governor of the state of New York, if being a democratic socialist means that you believe healthcare, housing, education, and the things we need to thrive should be a basic right, not a privilege, then count me in. And a similar emphasis on outcomes was taken by Andrew Murray in his recent book, in The Fall and Rise of the British Left, in which he argues for what he calls, and this is not a very easy term, the decommodification of necessity. In other words, the extension of the principle of the NHS to all the basic necessities of a decent life is a goal worth fighting for, he said. So there are quite a few views on how we see socialism among people like us who call themselves socialists.
Will you wind up now, Steve? Thank you.
So my conclusion is whether your emphasis is on common ownership or whether it's on progressive taxation and public services or on the outcomes, the common ground here is that neoliberalism has failed. Necessities can't be left to free markets. And I'm sorry to disappoint Phil Collins, but those who want to split the Labour Party, it isn't going to happen. The Labour Party isn't their ideological toy. It isn't a continental social democratic party. It's a mass organisation based on the trade unions that fights for people to have a better life. And whether you personally call yourself a socialist or a social democrat, a Marxist or a Christian socialist, or any term an old activist like me probably doesn't understand. It doesn't matter because we are all in this to fight for a better life for working people. And the reason some people are obsessively hostile to Jeremy in an almost cultish way is that in 2017, he showed and we showed how popular that vision could be.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. Absolutely fascinating. And our numbers watching have gone up and up and up over the last 20 minutes. Thank you very much. We now have more than 400 people listening and watching from all over the place, from Manchester, Nottingham, various parts of Wales, Birmingham, lots of parts of London, Weston-super-Mare, Grimsby, Spain, Italy, Sweden, Hull and Kent, many other places besides. So welcome to all of you. I'm going to hand over now to James Schneider. James, you have the floor for about 10 minutes. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Emma. I think as Steve laid out extremely well, it's clear that those that challenge the powerful will face attack. But we need to understand that those attacks come from two quite different places. So the first is from those that are essentially the powerful's enforcers, people that work for billionaires, for JP Morgan, for the privatized utilities that we were going to take into public ownership, the people that work for those that stand to lose because they are part of the tiny minority that monopolizes the resources and everybody's work. And then there are those that seek to accommodate to power. And that's a more difficult category for us to understand, but that's really the one that we need to know about to understand the nature of the attacks against socialism. And Jeremy as a representative of that, Jeremy is a representative of those ideas in the party, and attacking the left is part of what the accommodators do to show that they are accommodating themselves to power. And that is a key part of the script that we should bear in mind now under the new leadership, when seeing how at times Keir is trying to demonstrate that he's a safe pair of hands for some powerful interests by, in some cases, marginalising the left. But this has always been the case, and it's been the case, basically throughout history. And of course, but I think we're going to face it harder now. And don't worry, my talk isn't all going to be depressing. It all ends with a very uplifting bit, but it's going to be harder for at least three reasons. The first, Steve touched on quite a lot, is just, well, we're really scared the people that run society. I mean, Steve's laid out how close we came to possibly having the opportunity of forming a Labour government. We know what that, how frightened Morgan Stanley were, and Jeremy didn't mind that Morgan Stanley said that he was a threat to the economy. He put out a video straight away saying, yes, I am a threat to the economy. I'm a threat to the rigged economy that doesn't work for the overwhelming majority of people. When the BBC accidentally published an article that was embargoed, and it was up for 2 minutes, and then they took it down, saying that we were going to bring the National Grid into public ownership. The National Grid share price dropped immediately. I mean, they're very real material interests, and because we got close, the attacks will be harder to make sure it can't happen again. The second reason is closer to home in the party. In 1996, Tony Blair said in an interview, look, you don't have to worry about Jeremy Corbyn taking charge. Right? He was saying, don't worry, those in power, we've put the socialists in a box, they're in a coffin, they're never going to get out again, you don't have to worry about it. Well, that didn't go that well for them, because we've just had the last 5 years. Okay, we didn't win, but so basic social democratic ideas are pretty much mainstream. They're mainstream, not just across the Labour Party, but across whole swathes of society. And most of these policies actually have always had majority support in society. It just was unspoken. It was unable to come out, and it was given a political voice. So, but there is another reason why the attacks will be more ferocious still, I think, on socialists and on socialist ideas and on socialist organising. But this is the one that's a cause, I think, for some optimism, which is that, yes, the Corbyn project as the leadership of the Labour Party has been defeated and is no more. But the things that caused it to rise and animated it, those things have not been resolved at all. It is not like in previous times where the left has been defeated, and those that are in power are able to form some new hegemony, some new common sense that they could get a majority of the people, or close enough to a majority of the people in the country, to be satisfied with what was going on. Instead, what we've got is three dynamics which are fraying the control that the ruling class has, and they don't have any solutions to them yet. And this will continue to give rise to some scary things. It will continue to give rise to crises and danger for the overwhelming majority of people, but it will also give opportunities for quite profound change and radical change. Those three things and these three dynamics, I think we should bear these in mind going forward. So the first is the economy is stuck in an unproductive rut. The process of finance-led growth has failed. The process of neoliberalism has failed. It's failed in its own terms. Rates of growth are too low. The economy lurches from crisis to crisis. And basically, they've run out of other people's things to sell or to take, and divvy up a bit of the proceeds to some bits of society to maintain control. The second is the climate emergency, which we can just see every day. Look at the news. It's such a reality. It's already a reality for hundreds of millions of people around the world, and it's only getting worse, and it's also getting into public consciousness more and more. And the third is the end of unipolar US power. And the basic structure for how the international system has been governed for the last 70 or 80 years is breaking down, but in some ways it is innovating. The way that central banks have been able to coordinate with each other in order to prop up the system, both in 2008 and in March and April this year, show that it's not like the ruling class can't find other ways to coordinate. But that's one of these key dynamics, and these are the dynamics that are challenging the ruling class's ability to control society without anybody really fighting back and without resistance being organized. So even though that we've lost we lost the general election, we've lost the chance to have a socialist-led Labour Party, to have these ideas and these values at the forefront of the political discussion in the country, and we've now got a party that seems a leadership that seems less interested in, at times, confronting power than accommodating itself to power. Even though this is the case, the ruling class can't breathe easy, because it fundamentally doesn't have the answers to these three sort of super dynamics, which are impacting politics and society at a very kind of deep structural level, much deeper than say the vote for Brexit or the 2019 general election or even the 2017 general election. So, what should we do? We're all, there are 450 people watching this, us here. What should we do as socialists when we are seeing these attacks that there are on Jeremy and on socialists? So I say, yes, of course we defend Jeremy. Of course we defend him. Of course we defend the politics that he stood for. We defend the gains of the last 5 years. We defend those in the realm of ideas. We defend them in the party. We defend them in organisation. But I think much more importantly than that is that we strengthen the forces of the many in those three super dynamics that I mentioned, that we are as focused as possible on those things that will define the next decades, and that we have an approach that is based on an analysis of power, that we want the majority of people to have institutions and organizations that are powerful enough that they can confront the power of the tiny elite that runs society. So we don't get to choose, of course, the terrain that we always fight on. And as Steve was saying in his talk, part of the strategy of those that want to accommodate themselves to power within the Labour Party has been to pick terrain to fight the left on that the left is weak. So, we saw that on Brexit. It's also the case on anti-Semitism. So I'm not saying we can always decide what the issues are, but I think wherever possible, what we need to do is be on the front foot and be propositional, because right now we are in the midst of so many interlocking crises, and this pandemic, the economic impact, the impact on millions and millions of people in the UK and hundreds of millions, billions of people around the world is only just about to start. And so this is the time, yes, where we need to organise to help people and defend people and for resistance, but also this is the time when we can imagine a different world, because the world is changing hugely regardless of whether we or those in power like it or not. So now I think is the time when the way to deal with the attacks from the establishment, the attacks on Jeremy, the attacks on socialism, is to use our socialist imagination and to chart a new course through these crises, through what is coming down the road with the pandemic, to come up with a credible set of policies and institutions that we can imagine that the overwhelming majority of people will own and will control, and can change and can take on the powerful and run the world in the interests of the many, not the few. And so I think the best way we deal with and understand the attacks on the left and on socialism and on Jeremy is to apply our socialism to the world.
Thank you very much indeed, James. I'm glad you ended on a positive, uplifting note, our rallying cry, and we need to focus and be ready. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand you over now to Laura Smith. Are you there, Laura?
I am. I'm here.
Hello, Laura. I'm handing over to you now, and you've got about 10 minutes. We've got some questions who've come in. We'll do some questions, and then we'll do our concluding remarks and hopefully finish around 8. So thank you. Over to you, Laura.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Emma, and thanks guys for having me on here tonight. It's brilliant to be with you. And if I go over the time, just do shout at me, because I have a habit of doing it, as most politicians do. So a bit about me. So back in 2017, I won the seat for Crewe and Nantwich. I was not a winnable seat. Nobody thought it was going to happen. And we had a really good local campaign. We were kind of left to our own devices, and we got out there and we spread this really positive message. And we didn't have any outside support, but we weren't expecting it. And somehow we managed to do it. And what they say about Crewe and Nantwich is that it's one of those seats, basically. If you get Crewe and Nantwich, then you have the chance to be able to form a government. So at 6:30 in the morning, when we found out that we had won it, and we'd had quite a big swing, although it was just 48 votes in it, it was just incredible. And that message that we'd been out there on the doorstep for that campaign, it had really resonated with people, because people in Crewe and Nantwich, they wanted different to the status quo. They had voted for Leave in the referendum. They were up for the policies that we were suggesting on the door. They desperately wanted to see change, and we were offering it. And yes, sometimes on the door in 2017, we would hear the criticism towards Jeremy, but nothing like we saw in 2019. And for me, some people don't like to hear it, but as somebody who lives and represented a northern constituency, the main problem that we faced when it came to 2019 was without doubt the Brexit policy. And people kind of, you know, they wanted this change, and by 2019 they felt like, well, somehow the Tories have managed to get themselves into this position where they were anti-establishment. They were the ones offering something new. They didn't want to listen to us about our policies at that point. And yes, do you know what? Mud sticks. Jeremy had 2 years of being attacked constantly, with MPs briefing against him constantly. How this guy has managed to put up with that kind and to survive the kind of constant abuse that him and, you know, his family too have had to tolerate. It's just unbelievable. But listen, it's not actually personal towards Jeremy. It's all of us. And that's what this is about. It doesn't matter who it is who's taking that message to try and change the way that things will run. They will attack us. And we've got to grow some teeth. We've got to be ready for that fight, because there are a lot of us and we're not going anywhere. I sincerely hope so anyway. And you know what, when we were out there and we were knocking on the doors and we were trying to get past this issue of Brexit, we just couldn't, because there was a lack of trust in us. And there's already a massive lack of trust in politicians and the way that the political parties run. And sadly, you know, it was for me, it was like watching a train hurtling towards you. It was an inevitable thing that sadly I knew was happening in my seat. But like was said by Steve, it was an incredibly difficult situation and thing to navigate, made so much worse by the fact that so many people were purposely pincering Jeremy and his team into a position where they basically had no options left. So of course, you know, like I said, the whole thing has been incredibly personal to Jeremy, and I have the utmost respect for him. Whenever I got negativity towards Jeremy on the doorstep, I would always try and sort of suggest, you know, what is it? What is it? Can you disagree with me on this policy? Or and people, you know, they couldn't really answer it. They just had it in their mind, and that's the power of the mainstream media. And let's not forget that the majority of the mainstream media is owned by people who do not want the system to change. The system completely is set up for these guys. So we all need to kind of, like I say, we need to be ready for this fight, because it is going to be hard and it is going to be ongoing. And I think the main thing that we all have to accept is kind of to accept that we all played a part in this election defeat. And we have to learn from those mistakes, and we have to analyse them and be able to move on. And I think for me, one of the biggest issues that we had was the fact that we became so focused on Parliament and MPs and the people at the top, and we had Jeremy as the leader, and this is great. And no, it was always about the grassroots. It was always about getting our message of socialism out there amongst ordinary people, ordinary working people. And that's the only way we can succeed, because we're never going to have that support at the very top. And we've seen that in action. So for us as socialists, listen, the establishment sphere is the fact that large numbers of people across the Western world now are looking for something better than this neoliberal consensus that has dominated our politics for so long. But the rise in popularity of socialism, it demands more than us just kind of cheerleading. We have to get in there with people organising, and there's no point us preaching to the converted. And if you go out there and you talk to people, they support key workers. They want the NHS. They want their schools to be properly funded. They want a fully integrated transport system, and you know, people who to have that opportunity. People in Crewe and Nantwich, they are ambitious, but they have been held back, and opportunity hasn't been there for them. And we are championing that That is what we are doing. And somehow we've managed to kind of get stuck in this narrative created by the right, where we've been left having to defend ourselves over things and letting them dictate what our battleground is. And really, we need to just make sure that we stay very, very clear and focused on the fact that it is it's our message, you know, what we stand for. And how do we do that? Well, we do it by organising in the communities. What does that look like? You know, it's very easy for us to throw it out there. To me, a perfect example is if you look at food banks. I'm sure that all of us out here, we will donate to our food bank. Many of us will help our food bank. How many people are actually running campaigns to make sure that food banks no longer exist? We need to bring the politics into this stuff, because the Tories have done an amazing job at depoliticising everything. So people aren't joining up the dots. So we have to be able to do that. And that's not by throwing party politics down people's throats, because it will immediately get people to switch off. It is about talking to them in their terms about socialism and what that actually looks like. And we've got to get a bit smarter at doing that. God, the time, it like goes so quickly. There's so much that I want to say, but I'm already kind of getting told I need to start wrapping it up. Look, the main thing is we cannot let socialism fail again. We can't, and we need to be looking for new leaders. We want, we want these people who have done so much for our movement still involved. But we have to identify people who are going to continue this movement, continue pushing us forward. The planet, basically, we cannot afford not to do it. People can't. We've got this pandemic. It has highlighted everything, every flaw that capitalism has in our world. This pandemic has thrown it out bare for people to see, and now we need to make sure that we are out there trying to politically educate not only members of the public, but to be honest, ourselves. And we need to take that time to internalize this stuff and really, like Steve was saying, get to grips with what it means to be a socialist and come up with that consensus of the things we can agree on. And there will always be things we don't agree on, but there is plenty that we can do, and focus on that and get that messaging out there so that people really understand what it is that we are about. And listen, we've got to get off Twitter, not fully, but we can't keep looking into ourselves. We have to look outside into the world, because there's only a small amount of people who are kind of using this really. If I was to look at what was happening on Twitter compared to what's happening when I go and knock on doors in Crewe, it's very different. The take is very different. So it plays a part in it, but we can't get bogged down in it. And the mainstream media, let's never kind of think that these guys are our friends. Just to put in perspective, in the 2019 election, the mainstream press actually printed and covered more on that Tory lord, Ian Austin, than they did on the leader of the Liberal Democrats. So you can see what they were kind of using here to try and destroy any chance that we had. They're just not going to be our friends. And they're not going to be our friends, as I said, because they are the very people who benefit from them, are the people who want rid of us. And listen, I'm going to have to start wrapping up because my time's running out. I think moving forward, we need to make sure that we look across this country, we join people up. One of the great things about this pandemic, and there aren't many, but is that we have managed to connect with each other in a way that we hadn't before. And we can't lose that. There are lots of shoots popping up all over this country of hope. And yes, the ground might seem very scorched at the moment. We feel battered, but there are political education groups running in Manchester. I've been part of a fantastic one. I think it should be rolled out across the country. It's fantastic, brilliant. I'm part of the No Holding Back movement. Please follow us on, a little bit of a plug, follow us on Twitter at No Holding Back. And we've been out and we've done a listening campaign talking to thousands of people, myself, Ian Lavery and John Trickett, across the country, looking at how we move forward. And there are lots of us who still feel the same. So we can end up feeling very alienated, very depressed. like this situation is getting on top of us. But just remember, we are the many. We really, really are. They will try and divide us. They will try and separate us. They will try and push us down, but they cannot, because we want it too much, and we're not going to give up. We're not going to give up, and I'm not giving up. And God, this last few months, you know, I'm not underplaying it. It has been incredibly difficult for us all as people who invested time and energy into something that gave us such hope. We are battered, we are bruised, but we learn from our mistakes, we pick ourselves up and we fight and we show solidarity to each other and we act as a collective. And that's something that we probably should have done a little bit better along the way as well. Emma, I hope I've not gone over.
Thank you very much. Thank you. A little, thank you. But that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. My kind of politician, from the ground up, definitely 100%, always. In Kensington, they had never had their MP knocking on doors. They didn't know what had hit them. Anyway, back to the old days. We now have 500 people following us, and that's absolutely incredible, from all over the country and some from other countries as well. Now I've got a couple of questions have come in. Before I ask them, and we haven't got a great deal of time to look at these two questions, but I'm going to ask at the very end, I'm going to ask each one of our speakers one question, and that is, can you suggest one thing briefly, for good socialists to commit to do today? One thing that all good socialists should commit to do. And I'm going to ask you that at the towards the end of this meeting. And I'm now going to put a couple of questions that have come in. And here we go. The first question is, part of the mainstream media played a role in eroding support for Jeremy after 2017. What can we do to put ourselves in a strong position in future, aside from using our own social media? How can we make media work for us? And I'm going to put that to Steve first. Yeah, I'll put that to Steve first. If just 3 minutes, if you can, Steve.
Okay. Are we? Is this my only bite of the cherry, or do I get another go on?
I've got another question for you afterwards.
Okay.
And then you can round up at the end if you've got 2 or 3 minutes, not too long, please. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I mean, just on that point, there are things you can do to influence mainstream media, and we should be doing them. I mean, we should complain to the BBC when they do things that they shouldn't be doing. We can write letters and so on. But there's only a limit to how much success we're going to have with that. I mean, I think you can have more success with local and regional media than you can have with the London-based media. But I think the other thing is that we really do, and I think this is the most important thing, is that we really, really do now need to build up alternative media. We need to ensure that outlets like Novara Media, Tribune, Morning Star, you know, there are a number that struggle along and do a good job, but they need more support, and we need to spread their reach, both by using online channels to do it and also by more conventional channels, so that we do create a situation where there are literally hundreds of thousands of people who use these media as their primary source of information, and in that way will build up a kind of core to the movement of hundreds of thousands of people who have a real understanding. Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. James, would you like to give me 2 or 3 minutes on that question about how we can turn the media or mobilize the media on our behalf?
Yeah, so I think Steve's absolutely right that we need to develop our own channels and our own media. There's a great quote from Jello Biafra, which is "Don't hate the media, be the media." But I mean, you know, that's going to take a very long time, and you know, let's be real that legacy media is still going to be hugely important communicative channel. So you know, the one thing I'd say for how to deal with them is controversy. So they report on rows, they report on controversy. You need to make as much as possible whatever the row or the controversy is on your terms. And that's the best way that you can, even if the coverage isn't positive, it's still about what you're doing. So take, for example, the 2017 general election manifesto. When it leaked, there was all this reporting, oh my God, it's leaked. Wow, what a scandal, who leaked it? Oh my God, also look at these crazy things they want to do, blah, blah, blah. And anyway, people see, oh, it's a scandal, it's interesting. And they go, oh, Labour want to do these things. That sounds quite good, actually. I quite like that. And so the more that you can have rows on your own terms, the better. And then one small other thing is, I think we need to think more about, if we were in government, how we would democratise and free the media, and to have this as part of our narrative now. So take, for example, the BBC. It was reported a few days ago, that Boris Johnson is considering appointing either Nicky Morgan, former Tory Culture Secretary, or Andrew Neil, chair of the Spectator magazine and right-wing guy, as the chair of the BBC. Now, most people don't think the BBC chair can be appointed by the government, but things like campaigns to democratise the BBC, free up the media, I think these things as well can help show what the underlying power is within the media, and then make our criticisms of it when they come more credible.
All right, thank you very much, James. Laura, what would you like to say on this one?
I haven't got that much to add, and I know we're fairly short on time, Emma. I would just say again, echo really what the others have said, and subscribe to some of these fantastic smaller organisations that are out there. There are lots of them. Podcasts, I am a total convert to them. I listen to them now when I'm running, when I'm in the car. There's plenty of good left podcasts out there, and not much to add, so I'll save you on the time, Emma.
Okay, thank you. And Laura, stay with me. I'm going to ask you the next question first, which is, how do we keep people within the Labour Party? We've had a few filtering out, not that many actually in our patch, but there have been some for all kinds of different reasons. So how can we persuade our good socialists to stay within the Labour Party, and also bring in the communities that are doing a lot of work, such as Black Lives Matter and climate justice? How can we bring them into the, if not into the party, at least into our embrace, if you like? So what do you think about that, Laura?
I mean, I personally think that there's more members of the Socialist campaign group in Parliament than there ever has been before, I think. So if they can start organising and doing some good campaigns, that will encourage socialists. They'll feel like they have a voice within the Labour Party. We do need to hear from them more. But listen, I'm staying in the Labour Party. Some people think that it's a waste of time. I personally think that we need to be making sure that socialists and socialist thinkers are across our left movement. We need to be making the link strong with the trade unions. One thing that I will say is one of the biggest failings we had is, although the Labour Party membership went up and up and up under Jeremy, that wasn't replicated in the trade unions, and we need to definitely do some work with that. I can't tell people what to do. I'm going to be there working with decent socialists, fighting for what we want to achieve. And I think even if people do leave, and that is, after all, their right, hopefully we can make it a place very soon where they feel like they can come back, Emma. But we need to prove that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. And so Steve, do you want to say a few things about that? And please, after we finish this round, I would like you to answer my question, and then a few words to sum up. Thank you.
Do you want me to do that all in one go? I think you've been muted now. Anyway.
Yeah. Yes, by all means, if you wish. Yes.
Yes. Okay then. The on the question of these broader movements, James, can I just refer back to something James said? He talked about the three drivers, really, the three areas in which, in a sense, necessity is driving what happens, and that is the economy and the parlous state of the economy, climate change, and the crisis internationally, and the crisis of the United States power, and so on. And I think that points to three areas of movement and areas of battleground, as he said, the peace movement, the climate change movement, and also the economic struggle by, whether it be by trade unions or by renters or whoever it is. And these movements, and I put within that as well the Black Lives Matter movements and other progressive movements that we're seeing flourishing around us. I think it's very important that we engage in these in a very kind of non-sectarian way, where we work with all sorts of people who may not share our politics, but who are concerned about those issues, or a single issue. And we engage in those groups, not in order to try and sort of recruit them to the Labour Party or colonise them in any way, but genuinely participating in those movements in their own right, for their own sake. And I think if we do that, we'll gain respect. And in time, many of those people will, in fact, become socialists and join the movement. So I think that's important, that we get a breadth to those movements that goes way beyond the Labour Party. And that ties in with the second point about the nature of the Labour Party, which I mentioned. And I think this is the primary reason why people, in a sense, you can't really leave the Labour Party, because the Labour Party is far bigger than CLPs or the PLP or the Leader. It's actually the mass organisations, the trade unions and other organisations that are affiliated to the Labour Party, the cooperative movement and so on. And if you're leaving the Labour Party, you are in effect leaving that mass movement. And who wants to do that if you're a socialist? So I would hope people, the people who want a split are people like Phil Collins, who I was talking about. Is that his name? The Times correspondent. Who want to try and drive socialists out of the Labour Party. We don't want a split. We want to build a bigger, more united and stronger movement. That leads me to your question, Emma, which, I mean, there's countless answers one could give to that. But one of the things I would say is very important in this situation is deepening socialist understanding. And what I would, it may not sound like the most burning thing to some people, but I think it's really important that we encourage people to set up book clubs and reading groups. You just mentioned this, I think, Laura, with the Manchester thing, where we can have discussion about socialist thought and ideas. And in the 1930s, there was the Left Book Club as part of this flourishing of socialism in the 1930s. And we need that kind of spirit and that kind of thing now.
Okay, thank you.
Education.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. James, 2 or 3 minutes, and would you like to answer my question on what socialists should commit to?
Yeah, so I think I'll answer that and the keeping people in the party together. It feels to me the same or a similar question. So I think we have to recognise that for the last 5 years, the forefront of the struggle between the many and the few has taken place in the Labour Party. And so it's on that basis that we brought people in, and then it's on that basis that's been our focus. I think if we want to keep people engaged in the party, we have to recognise that isn't necessarily the case anymore. And that doesn't mean it won't be again, but as both Laura and Steve said, the going out, and Emma in the question, the going out to other organisations, the engaging with other movements and strengthening those ties, because we don't know where the next upsurge in resistance to the ruling class is going to come from. We just know that it is going to come. I mean, we saw this year with Black Lives Matter how that happened so quickly. Last year we saw with the youth climate strikers and with XR how that happened. So I think I would say, the way to keep people in the party is actually everybody who's committed to being in the party to make sure that we're also part of these other movements and we're part of these organisations. So, if there's one thing a good socialist could do, yes, stay in the party, but also join your trade union. If you're a tenant, join a tenants union. Get involved with other campaigns and get involved with community campaigns that you also think that you can win. It's been this quite depressing time, as Laura said, for Socialists in the party for the last 6 months, and it might be again for a little bit of time. And it's important, I think, that we remember that there's a larger world out there, and we take strength from standing in solidarity and organising with people and getting victories where we can. Thank you very much, James. Thanks a lot.
I think we can also remember that an awful lot of young people have got very, very mobilised. And I remember that moment 50 years ago when I was getting politically active, and I see myself and these young people in their teens who were out there marching and very, very mobilised. And there's no money in the world. You can't pay for that. You can't buy that. It has happened because of the times. So we have a whole generation of people who are now very, very politically mobilised. Would you all like to say one sentence, if you want to round up this evening? Come up with a little slogan, a word, or just literally one sentence. Otherwise, I will cut you off. Steve, would you like to give us one rousing sentence, and then we're going to round up? Thank you.
I'm not a Maoist, but my sentence might be, "May 1,000 flowers bloom."
Oh, lovely. That's absolutely perfect. Thank you.
And I'm sure they will.
Thank you. James, do you want to give us one sentence?
I am a Sankarist, so homeland or death, we will win.
Okay, fantastic. Laura, do you want to give us one rousing sentence, please?
First of all, I need to say what the one thing I think Socialists should do. Make sure you're in a trade union, make sure you are active in that trade union. And my one sentence will be, the ruling class, they resisted extending the franchise at every single turn, and it was Socialists who fought them for the rights that we have.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, and actually, Emma, I'm going to take another one. If you can see it. Nevertheless, she persisted, if you can read that.
Absolutely. Well done. Also in it for the long haul. So I just want to thank you all very much indeed. So we've got well over 500 people still with us. And thank you all for participating, giving up part of your evening. Very, very important and ongoing discussion. Please join Arise's the annual rally on September the 12th at 2 o'clock with John McDonnell, Richard Bergen and numerous other speakers. And huge thanks to Labour Outlook, who've had 100,000 visitors on Facebook this week, who helps put the event on. Please donate to them if you can. Can't be bold and spread the word and speak out. Follow Labour Outlook on Twitter, Facebook. Of course, vote for left candidates in the upcoming NEC elections. That's hugely important, so we get our word in there. Very important battles ahead. None of our founding socialist principles could be seen as abstract in any way at all. They are all very, very real and everybody's everyday experience now. You know, we've had for 5 years we got our message out, and they really didn't like it. So let's remember how scared they are of us, because our message is very, very powerful. And I, for one, am happy to be the grade 1 tool for socialism, fighting on the ground in the poorest ward in London, and I'm going to keep doing that. It's proof that neoliberalism doesn't work in lovely Kensington, Chelsea. So and articulate our vision, get our messaging right, and one day we will. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.